Hello and welcome to Semaphore Uncut, a podcast for developers about building great products. Today, I'm excited to welcome Gleb Bahmutov. Gleb, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Hello, everyone.
Great. Can you just go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Gleb Bahmutov. I'm a Senior Director of Engineering at Mercari US, which is an online marketplace available in the United States and Japan. We are a subsidiary of a Japanese Mercari company, which was started first and was very successful and expanded into the United States. If you have something that you no longer need or use, you can take a picture, create a listing, and sell it very quickly. So to me, this is important because we have so many things that we buy and then throw away, right? And Mercari makes it so much simpler to reuse it by selling to someone else.
Yeah, it's also good for the planet.
Yes.
You also have, I would say, a history in testing and testing tools. So the previous position that you held was at Cypress, right? Can you give us a history of that?
So I always loved writing software that works. So at every job I had, from college days, I loved writing tests, right? I loved playing with software and I loved to make sure that my software always works, especially when you come back to it like a long time later. I'm a strong believer that you build value by writing it once and then using it for a long time. And to be able to use even my own projects for a long time, I have to make sure that when I come back to them years later, that I understand that I can upgrade dependencies, that I can add features. And for that, you need, good quality code and tests. So I always loved writing tests. And now 5 years ago, I joined a company that was just started called Cypress.io because I had this need for a company where I worked at the time to write end-to-end tests for web applications, right? Open the website by visiting the URL, finding the text, finding a button, clicking on it, making sure the page responds correctly. So it's a huge problem, right? There are so many tools. I used a lot of them from Selenium to Phantom.js, Nightmare, WebDriver. But when I saw Cypress prototype was built in a very interesting way architecturally, that doesn't use, Selenium WebDriver, I thought, this is the best thing, right? Like, I'm just excited to see my website being loaded, see the commands that run, being able to debug them. And I worked with Cypress using like the test run and writing tests for a year before I joined the company. So when I came in, I was like, I'm so excited about writing web application tests. I want to make them better. And so I worked for 4 years at Cypress.io as VP of engineering, building the test runner tools, integrations with the CI providers like Darker, like we talked about Semaphore a long time ago, right? And Cypress tests, and improving documentation, building workshops, making sure that everyone who needs end-to-end tests for web applications can do it in less than a minute, let's say, from nothing. And it's kind of funny that I joined Mercari US because the chief technical officer is someone with whom I worked before a long time ago, who really wanted me to help them actually write end-to-end tests. So if before I could kind of consider myself, one of the developers at Cypress of testing tools, now I'm on the other side of the fence completely. No, before, of course, I wrote tests and everything, but now I'm 100% Cypress.io user myself. And I can see the bigger picture, I would say, and apply everything I know, all the tips and tricks that we suggested users do, right, when writing tests, but actually doing it inside a large organization and, teaching others, making sure our teams are successful, making sure the CI infrastructure is working, the dev environment are working, all the things that go into day-to-day testing, right? Now I'm doing it as part of Mercari US.
We've just released the CI/CD for Monorepos ebook. It's for software engineers who are evaluating or want to optimize the monorepo way of software development. You'll learn how to build a monorepo-first CI/CD pipeline and have a functional microservice application built, tested, and deployed from a monorepo. Check it out on our website, semaphorecI.com/resources/monorepo-CICD.
There is a upcoming conference, TestJS Summit, and I mean, we know each other for a long time, but we spotted you there giving a talk with a very interesting title. Let me read it. So it says, Testing Pyramid makes little sense. What can use instead? It was immediately clear that it's a great thing to talk about. There is a lot of enthusiasm that drove you through your career around testing, making great software. So I would love to hear from all your experiences, how you ended up with this talk and what are the ideas. Can you give us a high-level overview and then we can dive into specifics and see?
Absolutely. So the TestJS Summit is an online conference. It will be held on November 18th and 19th, I believe. Everyone can join from your room, right, from work, watch the talk recordings later. So the presentation I'm making, it's not my own presentation. I'm doing it with my friend Roman Sandler, a developer from Fiverr. And we always looked at the advice that everyone gives in the industry. When you pick what tests to write, you have to follow a pyramid approach. At the base of a pyramid, like very wide base, very unit tests, the tests that you write for smallest pieces of your code, like a single function, a single class. Then you write fewer tests that you call integration. That's the middle of a pyramid. You start putting pieces of code together. And you can, for example, test your database layer, but there is no database. You mock and stop the database itself. And then at the very top of a pyramid, you have end-to-end tests. And that's where you test the whole API, the whole web application. You visit the URL and operate like a real user. And that's where Cypress would be used. And there was always given an advice that you should look at this pyramid and look at the speed of execution, where if you go down at the unit tests when they're very fast, low effort, you can write a lot of them. And then if you go up the pyramid, you would have slower tests, but they would give you more confidence, right? Because they would test bigger part of the system. And to me, that was like, okay, I agree, right? It's faster to test a single function, right, than to test the whole website. I agree with that. But if you look at all the factors that go into a testing day-to-day work, right, it's not just running the tests. It's not just like opening a site and clicking a button versus, confirming that adding 2 and 2 together equals 4. No, you have multiple places where you spend effort during testing, right? Everything from installing the tool to writing tests to running the test. And running the test was what people usually complain or talk about the speed of testing. Then, if a test fails, you have to debug it, usually on CI, right? How much effort does it take to debug a failing test? A unit test versus integration test versus end-to-end test. Now, this is, I would say, a very significant chunk of the effort, because running the test, you can parallelize, right? You go to, Semaphore and you just buy a bigger plan and you spin up more boxes to run tests in parallel, and then they run faster. So to me, that's not where you spend the effort. To me, it's like debugging a failing test. That's where your human time is spent, right? And the last category where I think you should think about is how much effort does it take to maintain the test? Meaning, if you change the feature, you have to change the tests. So is it hard to change the test or is it easy? Now, if you actually write a lot of unit tests, you're testing usually implementation. So if you change what the code is supposed to do, all of a sudden you have to update all these tests. So the maintenance effort shuts up. If you write a lot of integration tests where you mock everything, you mock implementation details. You change a feature or you add something, and all of a sudden everything has to be redone. And you pay this giant maintenance cost. Now, what about end-to-end tests? Well, end-to-end tests, they operate like a user. So by definition, you test through the interface, the public interface of your website. So if you change implementation under the hood, you can swap the whole like React for Angular or Vue. You can swap your whole backend. The test should not be concerned. So the maintenance might be actually much lower. Okay. So the testing pyramid to me is like one axis up and down, expensive, cheap. I think became a dogma where you're like, yes, everyone has to follow this and write more unit tests, but very few end-to-end tests. Now, so we're sitting with Roman Sandler, and before we talk about what we should replace testing pyramid with, I was thinking about something like, why is the pyramid that shape in the first place? Why do we have a lot of unit tests but fewer end-to-end tests? Because from the point of the user, it should be reverse. You should write more end-to-end tests to make sure the web application, everything it uses, works. So I was thinking, and I think it has to do with how we develop software, right? So think about you develop a new web application, you start planning it, that takes time. You code it up, takes biggest chunk of your time. While you code, you can be writing unit tests, and most developers actually write unit tests because it's easy, right? It's fast to run. It helps you write the software. So as you code the application, you write unit tests, and then you start kind of putting the application together. Maybe your team wrote part, I wrote part, so we write tests as well. Then we deploy it, and then we start testing it end to end, usually manually at first, right? And Darko, I don't know about you, right? But if you plan like how long a project should take, let's say 4 months or 6 months or a year or 10 years, doesn't matter. By the time you get to deploying and testing, you're out of time usually. The project is late. If it's not, then you work at a very, very good company, probably, right? But to me, you usually run out of time. Overtime is very short. You have to like release it and get paid and everything and move on. So by the time you can write end-to-end tests, you run out of time to write them. And that's why you write very few of them. So to me, the shape of a pyramid is because you started writing the unit tests first because you could write them. And by the time you get to the tip of the pyramid, you usually run out of time and you have time only for very few tests to write. So this is how I explain the shape of a pyramid. But let's talk about what we can replace it with, right? Because I think in the back of your mind, you're like, yeah, everyone can, talk bad about something, but if you don't come up with a solution, that's very little value in complaining. So Roman Sandler and I were thinking, and we decided, look at the whole picture. Why are you doing testing? Because you want to make sure that your software works, right? You want to be confident that when you release something or deploy something, that when the user uses it, it works, right? You want to have high confidence in your tests. You don't want to have low confidence. So you can actually think about the whole testing picture as like rows from low confidence to high confidence. And in the columns, you can think about the effort you spent. So you can spend very little effort, medium effort, or a lot of effort. So let's say you only do manual testing. You do it yourself, or you hire a team, right, to do manual testing. Well, that would put you in the high effort column, right? Because manual tests require a lot of time, right? Now, if you do everything manually, how confident are you that you can release the new feature or deploy software? I would say you cannot be very confident. It's probably medium, because human users, if they have to do the same thing again and again, they miss stuff, right? Because it's very like boring job, honestly. Always going on, oh, I can log in, oh, nothing looks wrong, right? You miss stuff. So you spend a lot of effort and you end up only in the medium confidence. But where do you want to be? You want to spend very little effort, meaning everything is automated, but make sure your tests catch everything. So you want to be in kind of, I would say, top left corner if you think like low effort, high confidence. Most organizations are somewhere in between. Most organizations, some kind of roaming, maybe it changes over time. Maybe it started well, right? But as you got more features, the test don't really test everything. Maybe they test one part or so. So you're kind of in the middle. Maybe you drop with time and so on. So think about how much effort does it take to write whatever types of tests you're writing or whatever combination versus how much confidence you get at the end of the day, and be honest with yourself. And then think, what can you do to lower effort and increase confidence? So Roman calls this testing matrix. You apply all your professional knowledge, right, to actually use this matrix as you plan your testing. You apply what you've done before, what tools you have experience with, what tools you think are appropriate for the types of tests you have to write. It could be unit test, it could be API test, it could be security reviews, it could be visual tests to prevent CSS regressions, it could be end-to-end tests. And be honest with yourself and say, okay, so if I have to increase confidence, because right now I don't have confidence, what kind of test should I write? And probably, from my experience, you would write more end-to-end tests. Yes, it would probably take you a little bit longer to run them, but the effort would be well worth it, because all of a sudden you're like, okay, I cover all my payment and shipment features, right? With automated tests. They will never sleep, right? They will never, kind of get bored and kind of glaze over and click a wrong button or not notice there is like error, 500 response code, because they check for that, right? They would always go all the way to the confirmation page and confirm that the success message is shown, rather than like finish it early. Oh, it looks okay, so I know, the confirmation will be fine. So this is what we're thinking. This is what we will talk about at TestJS Summit. And if you can attend, we'll put the link, right? We'll share the link, and I hope you'll find it useful. I hope this dogma of end-to-end tests are expensive, so write very few of them. Unit tests are cheap, write a lot of them, right? It will be changed a little bit, right? And maybe test matrix will be a better way.
We've just released the CI/CD for MonoRepo's ebook. It's for software engineers who are evaluating or want to optimize the MonoRepo way of software development. You'll learn how to build a MonoRepo-first CI/CD pipeline and have a functional microservice application built, tested, and deployed from a monorepo. Check it out on our website, semaphoreci.com/resources/monorepo-CICD.
There is a lot of talk about the testing pyramid. I mean, from our position, I would say that maybe, whenever we are, helping our customers to iron out some of the bottlenecks that they have in their teams, and those bottlenecks happen from very different reasons. There are situations in January, company had 15 engineers, now they had 150 engineers. It's the same application underneath. They need all to, keep being productive, in work and decide how they are going to interact and structure the teams and all that. On the other hand, the more successful the companies, the more problems they have because the faster they need to move. There is also a problem of having, running test suite across literally 100 runners because they have a huge test suite and then they are struggling. They want to give their developers that fast feedback loop of under 10 minutes. Can it be under 5? Can it be under 3? Then there is also that element of flakiness and tests becoming slower over time. So there are different things at play here. There are also those inverted pyramids. I mean, there are companies and there are teams that have close to 0 unit tests. As I'm analyzing what you laid out is that potentially for each individual feature, maybe individual team, because team working on billing has maybe a different set of requirements, and depending on the team working on a part of maybe a marketing page or, there are different requirements for those. But as you were developing about the cycle of developing a feature, maybe at each cycle of improvement in each iteration of the feature, we can rethink. So for this concrete feature, how we are going to structure that pyramid matrix. I would say teams just having that in place is like a checklist. Okay, one of the things that we are going to do now is rethink what's our testing strategy for this feature. Sounds simple, but it's, I would say, pretty profound for a lot of teams that they should be doing that.
Darko, you hit the nail on the head, so to speak, right? We usually iterate on developing software, I would say, right? You plan the first feature, you implement it, you deliver it to the customer. If everything goes well, you have to deliver a second feature, right? And you plan it, you code it up, you test it, deliver, right, to a customer, and so on. So this whole process repeats. And at each step, and there are like, let's say 4 or 5 major steps, from planning to coding to testing to delivering or deploying, you can think about how you are doing the testing. So during planning, you can ask yourself, how are we going to test this? Right? Very simplest thing, like how are we going to write a test? Do we have to write tests at all? Maybe it's a prototype. Maybe it's a feature where you're like not sure it's going to stick or not, and you're like, forget it. If we need to, we'll manually check it. But you have to ask those questions during the planning phase. And you also have to ask a question, how much a bug in this feature would cost us? Right? Because if you're working on payment system, you probably have to say, yes, everything that slips by during planning and coding all the way to the customer, to production, will be very expensive to ship, both in our reputation, in revenue, potentially financial mistakes. So some features are very costly if you let the bug slip in, right? Some features, not so much. When during coding it up, like when you code it, like, do I have to write tests? What kind of tests should I write? And that's where you have to pick the right tool to test. Are the tests readable what I'm writing? And this is where sometimes when you look at the test you're writing and you find that you're fighting against the code, you write all these tests that just look bad and complex. So maybe you picked a wrong testing tool. Maybe you're writing a wrong type of test. For example, if you have to stop a lot of code, maybe you're writing integration test or unit test, and you should be writing end-to-end test. Maybe during the testing step, especially, you have to ask yourself, do I have to test just how feature works, or do I have to confirm the implementation details? I'll give you an example. Let's say you're doing payment tests, and you decide, okay, it's very important, I'll write end-to-end test that goes for the payment, enters credit card, and calls the payment service. Now, if you decide that you want to confirm implementation details, then when you write the end-to-end test, you will spy on the network call that sends that payment, and you confirm that everything it sends has credit card, the name, the item ID, whatever you want, right? And that the response has certain fields, doesn't have errors. So that would be kind of confirming the implementation details of a network call. But then consider this. Payment and shipping are very important to any service, right? So you want to make sure it works. Now, if you just test the UI through the page, if you refactor the UI, you can accidentally forget some field in the payment call, right? For example, you forget that the credit card can have 3 or 4 digit confirmation code, right, when you enter it. If you don't confirm the network call, maybe you will get an error, right? Or maybe your payment provider will start, pinging you saying, oh, wait, we cannot process it, declined. And you're like, can I debug this? Why is it happening all of a sudden? And then if you go, oh, I should have confirmed the implementation detail, right? So you have to decide what you want to test. Finally, when you do the deployment, right, and release, that's a good opportunity to write end-to-end tests, both happy paths and, unhappy error paths. And I think this is very important. Like once you iterate, usually when you deploy, let's say it again in a testing pyramid, that's where you are very short on time, right? And people rush and deadline everything. And so usually you write fewer end-to-end tests that you really need. But I think personally, but iteration is very good because when you iterate and you say, okay, now I have to plan the next feature. Before you do it, that's your perfect opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to be refactoring a lot of code. Let me add end-to-end tests, the ones that I forgot or did not have time, right, to finish during previous iteration. Now, during planning, I can start with them to make sure that when I add new feature, that I will not break existing ones. So I think the iteration is very important. And at each step, you can ask yourself questions regarding your testing strategy, the confidence, and the effort you spend on testing. And Roman has a great job. He does a great job in TestJS presentation because we already recorded it, right? It's all remote and we prepare video, where he literally gives you 4 or 5 questions to ask yourself as a team during each step of iteration regarding testing. So that if you look back at your testing matrix, effort versus confidence, but you know where you are and you move in the right direction. Lower effort, more confidence.
That's a great example. that you made with the payment option, where you potentially want to verify details of the implementation to be correct. Yeah, and one question, if you have experience in this area, as software matures, over years, hopefully becomes successful, usually people start, if for nothing else than just for the sake of, making sure that people can work together, and be happy and not step on each other's feet, you should draw the line somewhere and make some cuts potentially. And those borders are different. You can embrace certain architecture because of this or that reason, but you need to make those cuts. And potentially some team just ends up developing an API that some other team will use, and maybe a third team would implement the UI there. Do you have any experiences in that area or tips that you can share maybe?
Darko, it's almost like you're reading my mind, honestly. So, yes, for the last 5 months, right, as I'm looking to improve the quality of the web application and mobile application at Mercari US, we have this situation like multiplied by 100, right? Let me explain. If you take any complex web application like Amazon, Mercari, what you see when you, for example, enter a new item to sell, or when you buy an item, or when you search for an item and it suggests items, right? It's a facade. It's not a single application. It's almost as you see a playground. And on the playground, you have all these components that show different information. Now, that information comes from all the different teams, like you said, that have their own boundaries, their own APIs. For example, when you search for an item, right, there is a search API. So the widget you see is owned probably by one team, but the API it calls and all the data that goes into there and analysis is owned probably by even more people than the people who actually make the widget, right? So we have at Mercari tens, if not 20 or 30 teams, each responsible for APIs and microservices, and they all go into the single page that you see, right? So when we write end-to-end tests, right, we indirectly exercise the work of every team, right? I can promise you, and I can share with you that when I joined and I was doing prototype end-to-end tests using Cypress, we found errors that were ultimately assigned to each team, right? Common searches did not work. We traced it back to the team that changed something in the API and suddenly suggested search would not work. Pricing, right? Suggestion where you list an item and you suggest a price of, let's say, $100, and it comes back and says, oh, items like this usually are sold for $50. Did not work. Shipping, taxes, right? All the areas from different teams, they can be tested like a user. But here's where the things get interesting. Yes, you can write the test, but the confidence in your test comes not when you can catch, right, the regressions and bugs later on. It's when you prevent them. And so that's where organization of your development lifecycle matters, and your CI matters so much. My first advice to anyone doing testing is make sure you test in dev environment first. Then make sure you have dev preview environments where each pull request gets its own preview that you can run tests against, right? And now, Darko, what we're doing is all the different teams, right? The teams that own different APIs and all the things, and the web team, when they have pull requests, each team separately, we have a web UI that uses their URL, right? That's like for that pull request. And we run tests against that. So we're trying to catch for each team a problem, right? Before we merge code and before we have this problem, and we have to investigate and figure out who caused it and when. But this is the easiest part. That's where you catch logical errors in pull request. But there's so much more that requires running end-to-end tests. For example, we use feature flags a lot. And many organizations, right, they have feature flags where they control parts of a page or which API it calls. Every time you change a feature flag, usually using a dashboard somewhere, you want to rerun the test because we found that someone flipped a switch and all of a sudden, like some part of the site did not work correctly. And it required so much investigation to trace it back to this feature flag. So feature flags, if you change a value, You have to retest it. If you redeploy something after, let's say, upgrading, Go language version or library, you have to run the test again. If you do database migrations, you want to run some of the tests again to confirm, because you want to quickly trace it, right, to where the change was that broke things. And it could be across teams, like you said, the boundaries, right? Bugs can cross boundaries easily. It's your organization structure that has problems jumping over the boundary and finding who's responsible for the change that introduced the bug. So all I'm saying, end-to-end tests are extremely effective, right? But it becomes now organizational question. It's like, can you organize running of end-to-end tests or whatever you think effective tests are when something that potentially can cause an issue, right, happens? Could be pull requests, could be deployment, could be some migration, could be hardware upgrade, right? Could be DNS changes, right? All those things you want to run your test. And when you run them and they finish, you want to be confident that nothing goes wrong. If they're green or if they're red, you immediately know why the problem happened, where it happened, and you can revert or fix it, and for real. So being on our side of the testing fence is really, really interesting. And I can definitely sympathize with every large company or medium company or small company that sometimes the website doesn't work, or I see an error in DevTools console. I used to make fun of everyone, right? Like I would open DevTools and I'm like, look, even Google cannot fix that stuff, or whatever company. You go to any website and you find usually problems. But I do sympathize. And it's because of this huge organization with ownership and very diffuse responsibilities. But then the final product is the thing the user sees. So whatever you do, you have to organize the testing better.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, like that level of confidence that it brings you as, someone who is going to deploy a feature is amazing KPI almost to track on a team level. Not sure that I have ideas and how easy it is to implement, but I would say that on the granular basis of teams, based on their experience, their own domain, define and tweak how they are going to approach it.
Yes. Roman suggested a very good thing for confidence, right? What do you still test manually after you deploy software, right? Like that's the confidence. Like even just opening a website, right? Or it still loads, right? Like, why couldn't you automate it? Like that's the one you test manually. So go and automate it so you don't have to test it manually. So that's one measure of confidence.
Yeah, inverse of number of opens when I deploy and okay, it works. Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Gleb. There are a lot of insightful things. We are going to make sure to list to the slides and also to the upcoming conference talk. And yeah, also to share these experiences with our current customers and other engineering teams that we are talking to. Thank you so much and good luck with your new journey.
Thank you, Darko, and thank you for inviting me.